I mean, at the moment when you look at the government, or particularly the Chancellor and economic policy, it's kind of walking off the edge of a cliff. It knows it's doing so, and yet it can't think of anything else to do. I mean, it's got into a position, you've seen last week, these latest polls, where Labour was down to 15% and fourth behind not just Reform, indeed less than half the polling of Reform, but behind not just the Tories, but behind the Greens as well. And that's before the tax rises. And everywhere you look, where politicians have been elected promising not to increase taxes and then do the exact opposite of what they promised big time, George Bush the first, of course, being the most famous example of that, the electorate...
Good day to you and welcome back to UK Insider. If there is one thing in British politics that is more reliable than the rain, more predictable than a train delay and more terrifying than a seagull eyeing your chips, it is the wrath of Andrew Neil. The man does not simply criticise, he eviscerates. He does not just analyse, he dissects with the precision of a surgeon and the subtlety of a sledgehammer. And right now, the veteran broadcaster has turned his formidable gaze towards number 10 Downing Street, and frankly, there is nothing left but scorching earth and bruised egos. We are looking at a savage, no-holds-barred takedown that has exposed the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, and his Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, not just as incompetent, but as an active danger to the nation's future. We are talking about congenital economic ignorance, dead hands strangling the recovery, and a popularity rating so catastrophically low it makes Liz Truss look like the Beatles in their prime. It is brutal, it is forensic, and it is exactly the sort of reality check this government has been desperately trying to avoid. Quick favour, if you are enjoying this unfiltered look at the chaos in Westminster, do hit that subscribe button and click the notification bell. Over 92% of you viewing this haven't joined the family yet. It is completely free, takes a mere second, and it honestly means the world to us to have you here. Thank you kindly if you did. Now back to the show. Let us dive straight into the meat of the matter. Andrew Neil, writing in his latest column, has not minced his words. In fact, he has taken the words, put them in a blender and served them up as a smoothie of pure vitriol. He has identified a terrifying paradox at the heart of our current situation. On one hand, 2026 is actually looking, dare we say it, rosy. The global economic winds are finally shifting in our favour. We have a growing global glut of oil and gas, which should be bringing energy prices down from the stratosphere. We have a flood of Chinese imports, electric vehicles, batteries, solar panels, machinery, steel, that should be smashing inflation and making life affordable again. The ingredients for a recovery are all there, sitting on the kitchen counter, waiting to be cooked. But standing in the kitchen, holding a fire extinguisher and a bag of salt, are Sir Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves. Neil describes them as the gravest risk to this positive scenario. He refers to the dead hands of the Prime Minister and the Chancellor. It is a haunting image, isn't it? The dead hands of the state, cold and heavy, resting on the shoulder of the economy, sapping the life out of any green shoots that dare to poke their heads above the soil. And he does not stop there. He pairs this image with what he calls the congenital economic ignorance of today's Labour Party. Congenital economic ignorance, that is not an accusation of a simple mistake or a bad policy choice. That is a diagnosis. It implies that they couldn't run an economy effectively if you gave them a manual and a cheat sheet. It suggests that their misunderstanding of how wealth is created is built into their political DNA. According to Neil, the previous 12 months have been a miserable year for the economy under Labour's enterprise-sapping tutelage. The tragedy, as Neil points out, is that if we do see any growth in 2026, the government will inevitably try to take credit for it. They will stand at the podium, puff out their chests and say, "Look what we did." But the reality, the insider truth, is that any good news will happen despite them, not because of them. The drop in energy prices, that's global markets. The drop in inflation, that's cheap imports. The government's contribution, higher taxes, a bigger public sector and more wasteful spending, the unholy trinity of economic stagnation. Neil argues that Starmer and Reeves are suffering from a delusion. They genuinely believe that you can help economic growth by a bigger public sector, higher taxes, more public spending. It is the old philosophy of tax and spend, polished up and presented as modern supply-side economics. But underneath the jargon, it is the same old mechanism that drains the private sector to feed the bureaucratic beast. And as we move through 2026, that friction between the natural recovery of the global economy and the dead hands of domestic policy is going to be the defining battle of the year. But if you think the economic critique is bad, wait until you see the polling. Because if Andrew Neil is bringing the intellectual heat, the British public is bringing the emotional fire. We have spoken before about unpopular governments. We have seen prime ministers who are disliked, mocked, or simply tolerated. But what we are seeing now with Sir Keir Starmer is something historically unique. It is a collapse of such magnitude that the statisticians at Ipsos probably had to double-check their spreadsheets to make sure the computer wasn't broken. In November, Starmer's net approval rating fell to -66. -66. Let us pause and contextualise that number because it is so extreme it sounds abstract. That is the worst figure recorded for any Prime Minister since Ipsos began measuring public attitudes in the 1970s. Think about the gallery of rogues and failures we have had since the 70s. We had the winter of discontent. We had the poll tax riots. We had the financial crash. We had the Iraq war. We had Partygate. We had the mini-budget. And yet none of those leaders, not one, managed to annoy the British public as efficiently and comprehensively as Sir Keir Starmer. Let's look at the comparisons because they are staggering. Tony Blair, after leading the country into a controversial war in Iraq, bottomed out at -44. Boris Johnson, in the depths of the Partygate scandal when the entire nation was furious about cheese and wine while they were locked in their homes, hit -46. Liz Truss, whose premiership lasted about as long as a lettuce and who nearly crashed the pension funds, registered -51. Starmer is at -66. He has tunnelled through the floor of unpopularity, hit the bedrock and started drilling for the planet's core. He is 15 points lower than Liz Truss. How do you even achieve that? How do you become more unpopular than a Prime Minister who was forced to resign after 49 days? It takes a special kind of talent to unite the country in such overwhelming disapproval, and it is not just disapproval. That is too polite a word. Luke Trial from the organisation More in Common told the Financial Times that there is a real dislike, even loathing of Starmer and Reeves. Loathing. That is a visceral word. It is not political disagreement. It is personal. In focus groups, those sacred rooms where real people speak their minds behind two-way mirrors, the feedback is brutal. People call Starmer a liar. They say he only said what he thought he needed to say to get elected. This is the change trap snapping shut. He campaigned on honesty, on integrity, on being the boring but competent grown-up in the room. But when you promise the world and deliver tax hikes, winter fuel cuts and miserable growth, the public does not just think you are incompetent, they feel betrayed. They feel like they were sold a lemon. The liar label is the hardest one to shake in politics. Once it sticks, every speech you give, every promise you make is viewed through a filter of cynicism. Oh, he's saying that, is he? Wonder what the truth is. And what about Rachel Reeves, the Iron Chancellor, the first female Chancellor in history? Well, the public is not feeling particularly sentimental. She is often deemed to be uncaring. Focus groups say she is targeting people who can't fight back. That narrative of the cold, distant technocrat raiding the pockets of pensioners and workers while the public sector swells is lethal. It paints the government not just as bad at maths, but as lacking in empathy. And in British politics, you can survive being wrong, but you rarely survive being cruel. This growing hostility has opened up a fascinating debate. Is the problem specifically with Starmer and Reeves? Are they just uniquely uncharismatic and inept? Or is the public simply deeply disillusioned with politics more broadly? It is a valid question. We have had a rough few years. Pandemic, inflation, war, scandal. The electorate is tired. We are grumpy. We have short fuses. Maybe we would hate anyone who is in charge right now. But Andrew Neil argues that it is not just the vibe, it is the policy. It is the enterprise-sapping tutelage. It is the specific decisions made by this specific duo that have turned a difficult situation into a miserable one. When you look at the good news for 2026, the global factors, it highlights just how unnecessary the domestic gloom feels. If energy prices are falling globally, why are we still feeling the pinch? Because of tax, because of regulation, because of the dead hands. If inflation is dropping because of cheap Chinese steel, why are businesses struggling? Because of national insurance hikes, because of employment laws that make it risky to hire. The disconnect between the global opportunity and the national reality is where the anger comes from. People aren't stupid. They read the news. They see that other countries are bouncing back. They see that energy is getting cheaper on the wholesale markets. And then they look at their bills and they look at their pay slips and they realise that the government is skimming the cream off the top to fund its own pet projects. That is where the congenital economic ignorance comes in. It is the belief that the state knows how to spend your money better than you do. It is the arrogance of the planner who thinks they can defy the laws of supply and demand. And as Andrew Neil points out, it is dangerous. It is dangerous because it risks snuffing out the recovery before it even begins. Imagine a runner standing at the starting line. The track is clear, global economy improving, the wind is behind them, falling energy prices. But the coach, Starmer, has just tied their shoelaces together and put a heavy backpack taxes on them. That is the UK economy in 2026. We should be flying, we should be sprinting, but we are stumbling because the people in charge are weighing us down. And the public can feel the weight. That -66 rating is the sound of a population groaning under the burden. It is a scream of frustration. It is a rejection of the entire philosophy that says, we will tax you into prosperity. The comparison to Partygate is instructive. During Partygate, people were angry because of hypocrisy. One rule for them, one rule for us. It was a moral outrage, but the anger at Starmer feels different. It feels like buyer's remorse. It is the anger of someone who realised they made a mistake in the voting booth. It is a deeper, more structural anger because it is about the direction of the country, not just the behaviour of the Prime Minister. And let us be honest, the speed of this decline is breathtaking. Usually a government gets a honeymoon period. They get a year or two where the public gives them the benefit of the doubt. Give them a chance, they've been left a mess. Starmer's honeymoon lasted about as long as a British summer. Blink and you missed it. He went from a landslide victory to record-breaking unpopularity in record time. That suggests that the support was never deep to begin with. It was shallow and wide, as the pundits say. People lent him their votes not because they loved Labour, but because they were tired of the Tories. Now that the Tories are gone, the loan has been called in, and Starmer is bankrupt. The loathing that Luke Trial mentions is particularly dangerous because it is hard to reverse. Once you hate a politician, you stop listening to them. You switch over the TV when they appear. You scroll past their tweets. They lose the ability to communicate with the electorate. Starmer can launch as many resets and missions as he likes, but if 66% of the country thinks he is a liar and a failure, those messages are landing in a vacuum. And Rachel Reeves is in a similar bind. If she tries to be generous in the next budget to win people back, she will be accused of panic and fiscal irresponsibility. If she sticks to her guns and keeps squeezing, she confirms the uncaring narrative. She is trapped in a cage of her own making, built with the bars of her own rigid ideology. Andrew Neil's commentary serves as a focal point for this discontent because he articulates what many are thinking but perhaps don't have the platform to say. When he talks about the dead hands, he is giving a voice to every small business owner who has looked at their tax bill and wondered why they bother. When he talks about ignorance, he is speaking for every investor who has looked at the UK and decided to put their money elsewhere. The danger for Labour is that this becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. If businesses believe the government is hostile, they stop investing. If they stop investing, growth slows. If growth slows, the government raises taxes to plug the gap. And the cycle repeats. It is the doom loop that we were promised change would avoid, yet here we are, spiralling down the drain. So as we look ahead to the rest of 2026, the battle lines are drawn. On one side, the global economy trying to drag us up. On the other side, the dead hands of Downing Street holding us down. And in the middle, a furious electorate watching the struggle with a mixture of horror and loathing. It is going to be a bumpy ride. If Starmer thinks he can turn this around with a few slick slogans and a cabinet reshuffle, he is dreaming. You don't come back from -66 by tweaking the PR strategy. You only come back by delivering results. And as Neil brutally points out, the results that matter, growth, prosperity, money in your pocket, are happening despite the government, not because of it. The question is, how long can a government survive when its own people view it with such contempt? We are in uncharted territory. A Prime Minister with no political capital, a Chancellor with no friends, and a public with no patience. Something has to give. Will we see a challenge? Will the backbenchers panic as they see their own majorities evaporating in the heat of Starmer's unpopularity? Will the unions revolt? Or will we simply drift, zombie-like, through the next few years, waiting for the clock to run out? One thing is for certain, Andrew Neil will be watching, we will be watching, and you, the British public, will be watching. And if there is one thing this government should fear more than congenital economic ignorance, it is the righteous anger of a nation that feels it has been taken for a ride. The dead hands may be on the wheel for now, but the passengers are getting ready to pull the emergency brake. Thank you very much for watching. We shall see you in the next one.